Gen and Baku are back in Standard. Marin is no longer a fox, has now gone legit and become a manager, and apparently we're on a vacation to Perils of Paradise. And I don't know about you, but I sure could use a vacation. But unfortunately, it's still about a month away before our flight is connecting to wherever this paradise is gonna be. So while we wait for the new cards, I have the top 5 decks in Standard, as well as a lot of, well, very interesting decks. We got 25 decks to talk about in this video. But before we jump into the meta, let's talk about today's sponsor. This video is brought to you by Into the AM. Tired of the boring, crusty graphic tees that fall apart after a year of washing? Well, it's time to upgrade to a man's tee. Into the AM is a clothing apparel line made by men for men.
But ladies, it'll look good on you too, but at the same time, what doesn't look good on you? Am I right, ladies?
Get 10% off your purchase using the link below or by using coupon code ClarkHS10 at checkout. Into the AM has some of the most artistic prints that I've ever seen on clothes. And if enough people use our coupon code, there's a possibility to put my favorite painting onto one of their clothes. So if you would like to support this goal of mine, make sure to use coupon code ClarkHS10 at checkout for 10% off of your next purchase. Thank you so much to Into the AM for sponsoring the channel, and now back to the Hearthstone video. But before we talk about the decks, we have to talk about the Hearthstone meta because things are getting weird. Even though Gen and Baku were added into the format, it really didn't change up things a lot in terms of, Gen and Baku decks ruling the meta. It has changed up, a little bit on what people are playing on ladder. And there are a few new decks that come into the fray, but unfortunately, the meta really hasn't changed all too much. Like, the percentages have kind of changed around a little bit, and Marin does make an impact in some of the classes we'll talk about, but in my opinion, I think Rogue is one of the best classes in Hearthstone, and it is still at the bottom of HSReplay stats. And earlier it was looking at around number 8, number 9 before these new cards came in, but now it's just straight back to the bottom because Marin does find its way into Rogue decks. But Paladin and Hunter are still on top. Warlock is a big winner in this expansion. Warrior is still absolutely dominating the top ranks as well as some of the lower ranks. And there's actually a new Death Knight deck that is something that we've seen in the past that is actually re-emerging. But let's take a look at what is happening through Diamond 4 through 1. Zarimi Priest, Flood Paladin, Pain Warlock, Highlander Hunter, Handbuff Paladin. The typical noob decks, not in the sense that it takes a noob in order to play them, but these are going to slaughter all of the unoptimized archetypes. They're just going to win games because these are very solidified decks that will get you to legend very, very effectively. But honestly, a lot of these decks are not going to be on the list. Like, for example, Zarimi Priest. The Zarimi Priest is not on the list coming up because this deck falls off very hard when you get to Legend to where it starts to become a mid-tier 2 deck. And honestly, this deck is not even appearing on Donkey stats because players are just simply not interested in it. But we're seeing Pain Warlock back on top of the meta. We're seeing Insanity Warlock, Sludge Warlock being explored again, at least through Legend ranks. And at top Legend, Handbuff Paladin, Pain Warlock, Rainbow Mage actually finding some emergence back on the top of the ladder. But I believe this is in order to deal with the Pain Warlocks in particular because this is only data in the past 3 days because the new cards have not been out that long, but we can make some pretty bold accusations and some pretty bold assessments of the meta just because things aren't really shifting all too much, at least when we start looking at the Donkey stats. So here we are in Standard Legend on Donkey, again, painting the very similar portrait. We have Pain Warlock and Sandy Warlock. This Druid deck, which we will get to, it's a Druid deck. We'll talk about it. Handbuff Paladin, Rainbow Excavate, which is that Rainbow DK deck I was telling you about earlier. Naga Shopper, Demon Hunter, it's good. It's not on the list, but if you want to play this deck, you know where to find it on this website. Highlander Hunter, Drilling Rogue, Psycho Rogue, there are a lot of decks to talk about if we're talking about just straight up getting to Legend. But in Legend, in top 10k, Pain Warlock and Sandy Warlock, that Druid Druid, Rainbow DK, Handbuff Paladin, very, very similar decks. But then in top 1000 Legend, it is just run over by Pain Warlock, this new Druid that's emerging that we still don't know if it's that good, but it's becoming very popular. Handbuff Paladin, Insanity Warlock, Drilling Rogue, Psycho Rogue, Highlander Warrior, which is, we'll talk about it. Shopper, Demon Hunter, Highlander, Druid, Handlock, and Highlander Priest. And I have a lot to talk about when it comes to Handlock, but if you want even more information and more decks, Zeddy's got a top 5 decks in Standard and in Wild, and it mainly features the Marin card. And I've done my best in order to try and showcase this card to the best of my ability. And the truth is, is, Marin is really good because he can simply add the Wondrous Wand into your hand, which makes you draw 3 cards and they cost 3 mana, or they cost 0 mana, very similar to the Tall Woggle Treasures if you remember that. But the thing about Marin is that at top legend, it seems to be the best in Rogue, in Warrior, as well as in Druid. So if those are the decks that you want to play, Marin is going to fit in the best in those archetypes. Now let's actually talk about the best decks in the game, because we have a lot to talk about. The very first deck we're going to go over is just simple Painlock. This deck really hasn't changed all too much, and the reason why this is becoming popular again is because it's feasting on the even and odd decks that people are experimenting with. Unfortunately, unless you're playing even Warlock and you're playing a very specific build of the deck, it is very hard to beat the Molten Giant combo. This is still an effective deck, and I believe enough time has passed since the nerf to where people are going to start experimenting with this again, and they're going to realize that this deck is still very good. Really, the only way this deck loses if you do the Omega combo is to a deck that has a lot of burst. So unless your opponent has 8 burst in their pocket by like turn 4, turn 5, you are probably going to win the game if you do the big scam turn by either summoning a bunch of giants or imprisoned horrors. One thing you can keep in mind when it comes to this deck is Blood Treant does not trigger the imprisoned horror, because it does take life from you, but it is like spending mana, not dealing damage to yourself. So it doesn't work with the imprisoned horror. But if you want to use your Celestial Projectionist on your Blood Treant in order to get your Molten Giants out faster, that's honestly a very legitimate way to play this deck. It takes a little bit of finesse, and honestly, it does take a lot of self-hatred to play this deck, because you got to do a lot of damage to yourself. But Pain Warlock is still on top of the ladder because it just simply wins games with big stats. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention this, but these are going to be the best decks in top 1000 Legend first. We're going to go over the top 5 decks in top 1000, the top 5 decks in order to hit Legend, and then a bunch of other decks that are fun, as well as some other competitive strategies that just aren't the top 5, but are still very good. And one of the top 5 decks right now, for sure, is going to be Nature Shaman. We've talked about this deck a lot, and there is a different list running around that takes out the Miracle Salesmans for a Cactus Cutter, as well as a Blood Mage Thalnos. So if you don't like the ideas of the salesman because of the snake oil being 1 mana, then this is a different list that you could go with. But the reason why the salesman for 1 mana is probably going to be the list that I recommend the most is just because you need a 1-drop. Sometimes you just need something to play on turn 1, so you're threatening the board, so you can kill your opponent's opposing Needle Rock Totem. So this is just a really important, aspect to keep in mind, to where if you want your deck to be more focused on the combo, maybe go with the other version of the deck. But if you want to have more game against mid-range and aggro decks, you simply need a 1-drop to contest their board. So if you like Nature Shaman, there's plenty of videos of Nature Shaman of me talking about this deck, but I had one talking specifically about this version of the deck about a week or 2 ago. So if you want to see more information about Nature Shaman, go ahead and check that out. But the overall gimmick of this deck is you want your Jazz base equipped before you play your Flash of Lightning around turn 5, turn 6, so that way on your next turn, you can unload a bunch of spells with Lightning Bolts, with Crash of Thunders to remove the board, so you can set up for a Jive Insect combo by playing Conductivity into Jive Insect onto 3 of your own minions to deal 24 damage to your opponent's face. And you can easily deal 6 to their face using cards like Crash of Thunder in order to get rid of the board and deal some face damage. So the 24 to face is honestly overkill in a lot of situations, but it is just a really good combo, and even can beat decks like Highlander Warrior and even armor classes like Highlander Druid as well. They are a bit risky and a bit, difficult to get there, but those matchups are definitely doable. But this is not an easy deck to play. It's not about, the combo being difficult. It's about what happens when you don't have the combo. How do you use your cards and not lose the OTK? It's a very difficult deck about managing resources and not losing the OTK because you simply just ran out of discovers. So if you like Nature Shaman, it is definitely really good right now and has got a huge thumbs up from me, but it's also my favorite deck. Nature Shaman King. Play it. It's good. Next up at the top ranks of Legends, Sonya Rogue is sitting at the top, and I'm honestly very surprised by this. I really do believe the reason why this deck is coming back is because one player did very well with it and people are trying to mimic it, but this is still a very effective deck that kind of just fell off earlier in the previous meta because there was a lot of aggro running around and a lot of OTK. But for some reason, people are playing like giant decks, people are playing, these weird tempo decks, and sometimes Rogue can get through there just just because a good player can utilize this deck. I really don't know why this deck is coming back. I gotta be honest with you. But good players are talking about it. The stats are showing that this is a decent deck, at least a top 1,000, because competent players are playing this to the best of their abilities. Probably still not perfectly, but this is just a deck that really forces a good player to become a fantastic player, actually. So if you want the most challenging deck in Hearthstone right now, shit Rogue is the way to go. And the best way that I can explain this deck is that it is all about utilizing your Sonya to the best of its abilities. You want to play your Sandbox Scoundrel in order to get the 1-mana combo card, the Sandbox Scoundrel, that reduces your next card by 3 mana. So that way you can play, 1-mana Sonya. You can Shadow Step the 1-mana Scoundrel in order to play another card for 1 mana potentially, like your Cover Artist. So that way you have 2 Sonyas on the field. So anytime you play another 1-mana card, you get 2 copies for 0 mana. So it's really effective how this works, but also I already lied to you because when you Cover Artist the Sonya as a 1-mana card, the Sonya will give you another Sonya, so you actually have 3 Sonyas that are able to stack a bunch of value. So when you play 1 Valyr's Gift followed by the Deadly Poisons afterwards, you have a lot of free Deadly Poisons. Now, how do you make this work with hand space, with enough minions on the field? That's for you to figure out. So this deck takes a lot of brain power, and if you want to play the most difficult deck in Hearthstone right now, this is definitely the way to go, but just be aware that this deck is powerful, but you gotta make it sing. Next up is a deck we're not allowed to talk about. It's Redacted, and you wanna know why it's Redacted? That's right. I finally did it. I'm not talking about this deck. If you know Highlander Warrior, you know it's good. The only thing I'm gonna say, Marin is just as busted as you think it is. Now let's talk about the next decks, because I really don't like Highlander Warrior, and if you guys know me, you know exactly why. And the last best deck that we have at Top Legend is going to be regular old Drilling Rogue. Mining Rogue, Excavate Rogue. I don't know why this deck has so many names, but Excavate Rogue, Mining Rogue is still extremely good right now, and it also complements Marin the Manager in the best way possible for one simple reason. You can cheat it out with Sandbox Scoundrel. So there have been situations to where I've seen a turn 5 Marin come down, and then suddenly in the same turn, they play Prep into 1-mana Wand. Yeah, that's busted. I really don't know how else to sell you on that. When that happens, that is just a lot of tempo, and if we know rogues, they love 0-mana cards. So Marin the Manager fits perfectly in the rogue archetype for exactly that reason, for extra card draw, extra mana cheat, and also, if we really want to talk about Marin in particular, Crown is not that bad in order to get some extra resources, and one way that I have seen somebody utilize Marin to its fullest potential, when they had like barely any cards left, with like 1 card left in deck, they played Goblet into Golden Kobold for 10 or 9 random cards in order to keep the game going. I don't think they won when that happened, but it was still cool to see it happen. So, in case you're trying to think about how to best utilize the Marin, that is a pretty sweet combo that you can build up to. But other than that, this is just, typical Drilling Rogue. It's all about playing the Drilly as quickly as possible, so that way you can get your Scorpion value and you can bounce it a whole bunch of times. You have all these random cards, but let's be honest, Collapse is the best one. AoE is always good for Rogue, but we do have a video planned for this in the future, and it's actually a little bit of a different style of gameplay video, so check out the channel in the future because there's going to be some really cool stuff that we're going to be throwing onto a wall to see if it sticks. But the whole point of this deck is that you want to go for tempo. You just want to play stats, you want to stick the stats. Sometimes you want to value trade, but more times than not, you want to be the aggressor as the Rogue, so you can just, chip away their health and then somehow burst them with some sort of weird Sonya or Scorpion combo. Finish it off with like Tez or something. Maybe you can Tez Breakdance a whole bunch of times, but you got to remember what's in your Tez. This deck is very cool, and it's probably one of my favorite decks to play right now. Even though the meta is not the greatest at the moment, this is probably the best way to have fun by letting random cards do random things and just letting a good player cheat all the mana in the world. So if you want to be on top of the Hearthstone ladder while probably having the most fun, my biggest recommendation is going to be Yogg, Miracle, Excavate Rogue. And now let's talk about the decks that you can use on your Legend grind that may not be the best in the format, but might be the best on your way to Legend. Because it is not about playing the best deck sometimes, it's about playing the best deck into the field that you are seeing. And honestly, I'll tell you right now, even Warlock is a king on the ladder, and Zeddy was actually talking about this deck, not just in his top 5 decks video, but he had an entire video dedicated to playing even Warlock, and the only difference with our list is that in place of a Geode, I have ETC, and the reason why I love ETC is for one reason. You can play Sarg. Sarg is just such a good card that destroys certain decks that you will definitely see on your way to Legend, like Aggro Paladins, Aggro Hunters. If you throw down a Sarg, you destroy their board, suddenly give your future demons taunt, they are not going to win the game unless they have a Reno. Reno is really the only way to invalidate this card, and you guys already know my feelings on Reno. But ETC, as well as Ziliax, really do seem to be the best utilizations for the even archetype right now. Although I did make a meme talking about how the virus module should probably be the core for a lot of these even decks. But for this deck in particular, you just want tempo, and that's why we are going with the reducing cost module, the taking module, because you just need to play minions, and sometimes you need healing in a pinch. So Ziliax is really good way of getting some healing in a pinch, as well as your Sunspot Dragon. This is absolutely core in even Warlock right now, and I find it very shocking that Hearthstone players were not putting this in their deck sooner, because I think I was one of the very first people to try this, and then suddenly after my first stream of trying this, somebody actually reached, I believe, top 50 Legend. But Zeddy was also playing this in his video showcasing it. He was using the same list that the guy that hit top 50, top 100 Legend. And again, Sunspot Dragon, absolutely great card that should be utilized in this deck. And another card that a lot of people were sleeping on, including myself for the longest time, Wing Welding. This is how you beat a lot of the scam decks right now, such as like Painlock, because guess what card you're going to discard? You're going to discard a Molten Giant, and it's going to deal like, 20, 18, 17, however much damage it currently costs at the time, because it does matter the mana discounts when you do discard it from your hand. So if it costs 8 mana, there is a chance you might discard another 8 mana card if you have like your Ziliax sitting at 8, or if you have like another card sitting in your hand. So the biggest piece of advice that I can give you with this deck is to try and play your 8/8s and then immediately smack your tax cards to make it harder to remove the 8/8s. This is a deck that is, yes, a tempo deck, and sometimes wants to play the tempo options as quickly as possible, such as, a turn 3 Mountain Giant. But in some situations, like against a Hunter, for example, if you play a turn 3 Mountain Giant, you're probably going to get slammed in the face, and you don't have a lot of like immediate healing to really help in those situations where if your tempo's not good enough to carry you, you might just get hit in the face. So you have to keep in mind that the way to utilize this deck in its best possible form is to deny your opponent the best way possible. That's why you have the tax cards. That's why you have the Sunspot Dragons. Sometimes you need to use this on a minion in order to dominate the board. If you love board-based gaming, this is going to be one of your favorite decks to play right now. Pozic is great for hand disruption, as well as, keeping onto the board, exactly what I'm talking about. You always want to make sure the board is occupied so you can just keep dealing damage to the face, so you can utilize your Forge of Wills, your Dark Alley packs. It is just important that you are always on the board, always dealing damage, and sometimes you can just scam games with a bunch of 8/8s on the field. That seems to be the general theme of this meta, is utilize 8/8s, go face, stick a board. Oh wait, I skipped a step, because you always just go face with your 8/8s. But regardless, even Warlock is having a lot of success right now. I actually managed to hit top 1,000 with even Warlock as well. So if you want to utilize the best deck for Gen Greymane, I would highly recommend even Warlock, because there is no other even or odd deck that makes it in the top 5 decks in Hearthstone, in my opinion. The next deck we have is Insanity Warlock. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about this, but I will talk about the particular build, because that seems to be the biggest disagreement among players when it comes to this archetype, is what exactly is the perfect 30. I think that this list with the 1 Furnace Fuel seems absolutely fine, because, Domino Effect seems to be a really effective card at the lower ranks, because it's not about killing your opponent. Sometimes it's just about denying their win conditions. And since this deck has a lot of, healing out of nowhere, nowhere with Popgar, as well as cards like Tentacle and the Fellstring Harp. There's a lot of ways that you can just keep yourself alive and then, you know, destroy a board, completely invalidate your opponent's win conditions while, you know, raising up your own damage and your own fatigue count. The one thing I will say is that sometimes you want to try and save your Trog Gem Tosser for when you have your Crescendo combo, so that way the Trogs always go face, but every now and again you will need to use the Trog in a controlling way in order to dominate the board, and sometimes in order to have like a desperate AoE if you don't have another way of clearing the board. But yeah, Sandy Warlock is very good, but every now and again I just find this deck has a lot of non-games, so if you're trying to find like a fun deck at Hearthstone, I probably wouldn't be recommending Insanity Warlock right now, but if you want an effective deck and you want decision making to matter, this is probably one of the most effective decks that you can use on your Legend grind. Next up, we have the most interesting development in Rainbow DK in a while. People are finally utilizing the Excavate treasures in Rainbow DK, and honestly, I am very surprised by this. I had to do some research. I had to figure out, why are people playing this archetype? What is the appeal of the rat? I thought we wanted to eat the rat. I thought we didn't want rats in Hearthstone anymore. But it turns out there is one particular matchup that is very, very favored for this deck. It's Rogue. This deck apparently is very effective at dealing with Rogue shenanigans, and I find it very surprising that the list that I'm showing you right now is not even a Highlander deck, because there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 duplicate cards. This is pretty much as close to a Highlander deck as you're gonna get, but the only cards that seem to be duplicated are the Excavate cards, as well as a few other, you know, core cards like Mining Casualties, Runes of Darkness, etc. But yeah, Excavate in Rainbow DK is very good at keeping itself alive and denying your opponent's win conditions. So that way, hell yeah, can win the game with a bunch of different plague cards if you keep, you know, stalling up the game. And you can always discover more plague cards like the Down with the Ship, for example, because you can find that from Frostra. Oh wait, actually, wait, that used to be the thing. They removed the rune on this. Sometimes innovation, we go backwards, but you know, regardless, this deck is still good. It still utilizes Rainbow DK's, you know, survivability. But one thing I am very upset about is that this is a Rainbow DK that does not run the Climactic Necrotic Explosion, and that does make me very, very sad. So the only way to utilize this card would be out of weapons from the Rune of Darkness, because you're not really spending corpses with this deck, so you can't really put this in here. And I do have another Rainbow DK that doesn't utilize this card, so I'm sorry to everybody that loves the explosion. But right now, it's just not that good in this metagame, because keeping yourself alive and denying your opponent's win condition seems to be better than building up your own right now. And you can blame the Hearthstone designers for that. I would rather have this be legitimate, but denying win conditions is the way to win. Next up, we have Miracle Giants Rogue, which seems to be one of the most popular and consistent Rogue decks, and honestly one of the only ways of utilizing the Playhouse Giant. Before anybody asks, yes, I did try the Gaslight Gatekeeper package and Gaslight Giants with the Even Warlock, and it just didn't work. It did not work. Playhouse Giants in Even Warlock simply did not work, because this was just not consistent enough and had too many dead plays in Even Warlock. But this is still fine in Rogue for one simple reason. You have from the scrap heaps in order to make the Giants do absolutely ridiculous things, because you have Wind Fury, but you have Wind Fury potential. If I can find it, it's at the very bottom, because Hearthstone doesn't want you to remember this has Wind Fury. They don't want you to know, because it scams games. It's terrible. I hate it when this happens. Damn it, I really hate it when this happens. But another thing I hate is when they hit Rush into Lifesteal. This deck actually has Lifesteal, and you know what happens when Rogue has Lifesteal. It gets out of control very quickly. So I don't really know what else to say other than spamming big minions is good. Everything Must Go is honestly a perfect card for Miracle Rogue, and puts a board on the field so that way you don't just die immediately, because that's always been Miracle Rogue's weaknesses. I'm drawing a bunch of cards, but I'm not putting anything onto the battlefield. I need minions. Great way of putting some minions on the field. Dubious Purchase gives you that much needed card draw, as well as having the random minions getting destroyed, so you can sometimes kill one big minion. Or if you need to YOLO, you know, destroying like a 10-10 if there's a bunch of other minions, you do have that possibility, I guess. But yeah, card draws, you know, is really important. Quick pick into Mic Drop, how you draw the deck very, very quickly. Speaker Stomper, kind of like what I was talking about with Even Warlock. You throw this out when you have a bunch of 8/8s on the field, so that way the 8/8s will stick, hopefully dealing lethal damage, and that is how this deck is aimed to play. So it's not just about playing a bunch of 8/8s as quickly as possible. Sometimes you want to wait on your 8/8 turn, so that way you can, keep them alive with the Speaker Stomper combo, but it does depend what turn it is and what opponent you are going up against. So this is a deck that takes a little bit of practice in order to play perfectly, but when it comes to all the other rogue archetypes that are available right now, this is definitely one of the easier ones. Next up, we have Handbuff Paladin. I don't really think we need to talk all too much about Handbuff Paladin. The only real development to this deck is that people are now unironically running Air Guitarist in the deck, and I kind of get it, but at the same time, I don't think I like it personally, just having a one-of copy in the deck, when really, do you really need 7 hand-buffed procs in your hand? Do you really need that many? I would just rather run another minion that would do something. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's a second Astral Dragon. Maybe it's a cool ghoul. I don't know. Maybe you just run your favorite card and you just put the cardboard golem in there because this is the worst card and it needs help. Maybe hand buffing it in hand and having a 4-mana 8/8, for example, justifies running this card. But yeah, Handbuff Paladin is extremely effective for 2 reasons. Lifesteal and Rush. And also charge, I guess. Yeah, that's why Handbuff Paladin's good. I don't need to talk about this deck. The only other thing I will talk about is Ziliax. Ziliax is cool in this deck because it is finally utilizing a different module that isn't Virus and Perfect module and Ticking module. In fact, this is probably the only deck that I've seen that utilizes the Twin module to its best ability since Highlander Warrior stopped running the 9-mana Ziliax. But yep, Power module on top of that, so that way you can double the whatever you've done to this card. So Ziliax can absolutely scam games if you play it by turn 6 after buffing it a bunch of times. But yeah, those are really the only new things that have happened. It's still charge minions. It's still keeping yourself alive with a bunch of rush and lifesteal minions. This deck absolutely slaughters people that are not thinking about their opponent's outs, but it's also on you as the Handbuff Paladin to not run out of gas by overextending onto the board and having your opponent clear it. So Handbuff Paladin has this weird line it has to drive on where, do I go for big combo and save all my cards, or do I throw everything now and potentially lose the game because they have AoE? You gotta ride that line if you want to play Handbuff Paladin, but it's very rewarding if you can play this deck perfectly. It's not that brain dead, but it's a little bit brain dead. But if we want to talk about brain dead, this is brain dead. This is by far the most brain dead archetype in Hearthstone. If you want the easiest legend grind, something you don't have to think about as you're like watching Netflix, or if you're chilling with your parents, or if you're on vacation, if you somehow got your ticket to Perils of Paradise before me, I will find you. But yeah, boring Showdown, It Works, Pazik, Flash Sale, Crusader Aura. I don't need to talk about this deck. Showdown Paladin is still fine. The only reason why I'm putting it into the video is because someone's going to bring it up if I don't put it in here. It's in here. Don't talk to me about it. It's still fine, but you're going to get destroyed by anyone that knows how to play around Paladin. Speaking of decks that I just don't like, why did this meta have to do this to me? The Forbidden card, Redacted, can't talk about it. It's actually, I would be breaking NDA if I were to talk about this certain card that I don't like, even though I did address it by name earlier. But that was a different RENO character from previously, where he used to heal your face. Remember that? That used to be cool. But one thing I will say about this deck in particular, that does kind of, save it from being like the other Reno decks in my opinion, is that this is a deck that is all in on tempo and trying to end the game as quickly as possible. This is the Cantaloupe Highlander Hunter that is still the most successful deck on HSReplay when it comes to Highlander Hunter for one simple reason. It's got lots of synergies. Everything just kind of works together in a beautiful amalgamation, and honestly, I hate describing Highlander decks as beautiful, but it's kind of funny how the one Highlander deck that I'm not actively talking that much shit about seems to be the Hunter class. Because you just play minions, the minions do their things, you have a lot of aggressive tools, so that way you can hopefully end the game by the time that you play your Agromar into a 5-mana weapon, and if you need the Reno in order to get rid of the board, in order to deal that last bit of damage, it is there. You also have Yogg-Saron, you also have a Ziliax that is not Unkillziax in this deck, for the main reason that you are going for tempo, and you do have Product 9 secret shenanigans as ways of like cheesing the game against people that sometimes just don't know how to play around secrets. But regardless, this is a very effective deck because everything just kind of works perfectly. The Hunter Secret Bargain Bin was probably the best card that they've gotten in so long because not only is it card draw, it's tutoring, and getting a 0 mana weapon or a sharpshooter, or I'm sorry, a star shooter is actually not that bad. So if you want to play Hunter, Highlander Hunter is probably the deck that is going to have the most amount of varying games while still getting you a bunch of W's. Are they gone? Are the metagamers gone? All right, let's talk about some memes. We got 13 decks coming up here. Some of them are going to be more memes than others. Some of them are going to be a little bit more competitive. But the first deck we're going to talk about is going to be Funky Monkey's Even Hunter. And one thing I do have to talk about, Sing Along Buddy isn't in here. And I actually fought Funky Monkey as he was playtesting this deck, and he was running Sing Along Buddy during those games. So I don't know what happened. I don't know why he took this out of the list. This is the first thing I would think of when building like an Even Hunter deck. But apparently he just thought it wasn't powerful enough and maybe the deck needed more tempo. I'm not sure what he replaced it with, but Monkey does find its way in here. So there still are a lot of synergies that are happening with this deck. I can't really speak to the validity of even and odd decks right now because, in all honesty, when it comes to Gen and Baku as of right now, I wasn't thinking this was going to happen, but they don't keep up with today's standards in Hearthstone. And the reason why I think I can explain this is because hero powers are not that good right now. Hero powers used to be very good back in the day, and even Warlock is very good because for 1 mana you're drawing a card. Drawing initiative is always going to be good in Hearthstone, but even in odd decks are really struggling right now because spamming your hero power is predictable. You know it's coming. Like, when your entire strategy is centered around your hero power, it becomes a little played out and a little predictable. So when it comes to a deck like this, you really need some unpredictability, like Camouflage Mount, for example. Surprise Wind Fury, like you really need these high roll among high roll, like unexpected cards to win the game because your opponent is just not going to be able to win. Your opponent is just going to be able to destroy everything you do if you don't do something a little bit unconventional, such as running the 4 mana Zilliax that deals damage to yourself as well as doubling its attack. So there's a lot of things that are happening in this particular list. I can't speak to the validity of it, but even in odd decks are not necessarily bad, but they're definitely not good compared to the top decks in Legend right now. So if you're trying to grind with an even and odd deck right now, it's going to be a little bit of a challenge, but I have a few other lists that I can show you to kind of inspire you to maybe try some of these archetypes. Next up, we have Jombre Even Shaman, which honestly, I am very surprised that ETC does not find its way into this deck, so that way we could realistically slot like a Bloodlust or something with Thrall's Gift. That'd be really cool if we could do something like that. Maybe there's, a wave of nostalgia we want to put into this deck in order to scam the game. But it turns out that this deck is just all in on tempo and scamming games with Sea Giant from what I can tell. I have not play tested this yet, but Jombre is definitely a way smarter deck builder than I am. And honestly, after looking at this deck for a little bit, it does kind of make sense because it is all in on making a board over and over and over again. Cards like Sing Along Buddy work very well in Even Shaman in order to turn 1 minion into 3 for 3 mana. You have the Jukebox Totem in order to summon a bunch of other minions. You have the Bouncer in order to reward you for being on the field consistently. You have even Celestial Projectionist to work with your Sea Giants if you are so lucky, or potentially your Things from Below. Like, you can already see the synergies working perfectly, but the biggest problem with a deck like this is that every single board that you generate is not going to be like a game-winning board. So your opponent is going to save the AoEs for the very crucial moments, so baiting out the AoEs is going to be a little bit challenging. Setting up a game-winning board does seem a little bit difficult in my eyes, and that does make sense why Hearthstone Brew does make its way into this deck, because I really do believe that a lot of your wins are probably going to stem from this card, unless you're going up against a deck that simply just does not deal with your board. But honestly, I don't know much about this deck. I might give it a try for a potential video. But if you want to try Even Shaman and play a bunch of Sea Giants for 0 mana, this is probably going to be the best way to experiment with Shaman, because unfortunately, this class is doing very poorly right now in terms of good archetypes that are diverse as well. We already talked about the good Evenlock. Now let's talk about the bad Evenlock. I tried really hard in order to make a Snake Warlock work, and I'm going to have an entire video dedicated to this where I'm showcasing a different list that I was playtesting. But this is the most recent version of the deck that I have made, and I really do like how it's come together. But there's just one small issue with this deck. It's just way too slow. It's kind of double dipping to where we're trying to be like this tempo deck that can kill you with a bunch of 8/8s as quickly as possible. But we also have like this combo that needs like all the time in the world in order to set it up with a bunch of, you know, Excavates with the miners, Excavates with the drill fists, and bringing them back with the end games. There's really not a lot of ways of generating 2 snakes without bouncing them over and over and over again. So this deck is kind of, you know, a tempo deck, kind of a combo deck. The idea was to maybe bully some of the slower decks while also having like game against like some of the more aggressive decks by, you know, putting minions onto the field and mitigating their resources and stuff. But this is just a deck where it just has 2 different ideas that just kind of are clashing, and it's pretty funny when it works. But this deck's not that good. But Snake Warlock is technically doable in the even archetype, but the 1-mana hero power does a lot of heavy lifting when really it's not the heavy lifting that you want. Like, you just don't have healing. You don't have ways of keeping yourself alive. Snake Warlock is just too slow to see competitive play right now. But if you want a fun archetype, go ahead and explore it. It is kind of a funny deck. And this is going to be the last Gen and Baku deck that we talk about, but if I'm talking about a bunch of Gen decks, I need to talk about Baku. But there's one problem with Baku decks right now. There's essentially 4 different archetypes that people have explored. There's the obvious Baku Warrior, which is good, but it's not as good as the other warriors, so people are just abandoning it to play the good warrior deck because it is literally trying to do exactly what the other warrior deck is without Boom Boss. So you're really not going to get that far testing an Odd Warrior. Odd Hunter was something that people were talking about, but it simply just doesn't have a lot of ways of surviving and, you know, pressuring every single turn. If you hero power on turn 2 as an aggro deck, you are sacrificing a lot of tempo. So there's also Odd Demon Hunter, which makes a lot of sense, having a 1-mana upgraded hero power. But any lifesteal kills that deck. The only odd deck that I have seen anybody have success with is this version right here. And I'm actually going to give a quick shout out to the person responsible for this deck because they are a longtime viewer of the channel. But Alucard BU is the one responsible for this weird deck and apparently says that it has a decent amount of damage that it can generate, and here it is, you know, winning by turn 8. I really don't understand how this deck works. Maybe he can make a comment on this video talking about this deck in particular, but from what I can tell just sitting here, it is trying to make combos work with Pip as well as Shadow Touch Calvadir in order to deal a bunch of damage. Hold on a minute. Voodoo Doctor Alert. What? In 2024? Okay, yeah, I'm gonna need someone to talk about this deck because there ain't no way. Like what the hell? There's Flash Shield. Why aren't we running Flash? Like, there's already Flash Shield in the deck. I don't even know what's happening. This deck is weird. It scares me. It's also a priest deck, but apparently the way that you can win is by having a bunch of hero power value and going face with a bunch of the Calvadirs. I guess that's what's happening here. But I don't really understand how else this deck is going to win. It does have overheal shenanigans with Hearthrob and Grace of the Highfather, so maybe you can cheese out a bunch of minions all at once. Again, I don't know. But it is an archetype you can explore if Odd Priest is something that you've been throbbing over, trying to play. Okay, that was a bad pun. I saw throb. I wanted to make it work. Let me make my puns, damn it. And now we've got 9 other decks to talk about that are just going to be fun decks, and one of those fun decks is Handbuff Rainbow DK. I was playing this deck again right before the update and then played it a little bit right when the launch happened, and there was one reason why I was playing this deck. Top Legend players were playing Sinister Soul Cage with the bounce on the hero power, on the ghoul. Does that sound familiar? Does that sound like something that I did literally in the first week of Whizbangs workshop? Why am I just so ahead of the curve? I don't understand this. I am literally a prophet. I did not make this deck, but gosh darn it, I was the first person, I think, to ever try this, and it worked, and it was successful. It was also a Rainbow DK. I don't think I went all in on the Handbuff strategy. I don't even remember what my deck was. But the point is, this archetype was seeing play by Pocket Train, by Rekvam. This deck was actually made by Rekvam, so it's like Legend players could sometimes do beautiful things. This deck doesn't really work at top Legend, but it does have some surprising moments to where I actually am going to recommend trying this on your Legend grind. I maybe would have done it if I would have thought about it before I hit Legend, but This is still an extremely sick deck in order to play. In case you don't understand how it works, the whole point of this deck is to somehow bounce your hero power, which is literally a 1 mana 1/1 charge minion that is very effective whenever you buff it with cards like Amateur Puppeteer, and you can even, you know, double up the death rattle with cards like Yelling Yodeler. You have other hand buff cards like Blood Tap, as well as 1 copy of the Spellstone, and you can even get extra copies of the Puppeteer by discovering more undeads from your Toy Snatching Geist. You have your Paint Fin in order to draw your Hollow Hound and your Rezka more consistently, so that way you have ways of keeping yourself alive while also getting rid of your opponent's minions or even making them your own. So there's a lot of potential with this deck. You just want to draw in the early game, buff everything, remove those key minions that sometimes might be a little troublesome, sometimes lay out some big charge minions, some big taunt minions, so that way you can make room for the charge minions that are going to be potentially, you know, 10 attack, 11 attack, a lot of attack. These things are going to be huge, and it's just so freaking funny to finally see Sinister Soul Cage get utilized in a very effective way. But oh my god, I just wish this deck was better. I really wish this was like a tier 1 deck, because it's just so funny whenever it works. But if you want to have a challenge on your way to Legend while also having fun hitting people with a bunch of ghouls, this is the deck to be playing right now. And I am very sad again to say that Climactic Necrotic Explosion, after being relevant for so long, is finally back in the grave because a lot of people just simply aren't running this card at the top ranks. It makes me very sad. Next up is Wheel. Guess who's back? Back again. The Wheel is back. Tell a friend, because oh my god, this is like the only fun archetype for Warlock that I honestly, Warlock does have a lot of archetypes right now, and I will give Blizzard praise for that. But Warlock is so frustrating right now. Like, freaking having to deal with, you know, 8/8s consistently, having to deal with, like, crescendos that are healing my opponent for, like, 10 damage. I miss Sarg. Does anybody else just miss when Sarg was just game-breaking and was the best card in Hearthstone? Now it just seems like he's nothing. He just gets removed by Reno and gets invalidated for that reason. So it's like, it's good against the noob decks that can't handle, you know, big boy Sarg. But it's just really sad to me how much this deck has fallen off. But it has finally made a comeback simply due to Marin coming back. I don't know why. Like, I had a lot of success with this deck, but somebody hit top 50 Legend on the very first day of the update, going 12-3 with this deck, the exact same deck that is sitting here before you. I don't know how, I don't know why, but Wheel of Death, you can play Marin afterwards, so that way you can have these other cards that are, you know, filling your deck and not giving you fatigue damage. That was the main utilization of this deck. But one other thing that could be kind of funny is if you play the wand and then you have, you know, like 0 mana Wheel plus all these other cards for 0 mana, you could just do a lot of things in one turn. What if you get like all the good Symphony cards for 0 mana? What if you get, you know, like Pop Guard for 0 mana, a Wing Welding for 0 mana to set up like an OTK or something? I don't know. There's a lot of things that you can do with this deck. There's a lot of tempo, a lot of stats, and a lot of weird, random crap that can happen now that Marin is available in the format. But yeah, Wheel is back. There will be some gameplay in the future with this deck in particular. So if you want to see that Hot Wheel action, oh wait, Hot Wheels action. If you want to see some Hot Wheels action, there will be a video showcasing this in the future. So yeah, Wheel Warlock, it's back. Go ahead and play it. Deck code in description. Hot Wheels. Next up is another deck that I have not tested yet, but this is another Gyminator classic, to where he said that he went 15-5. I'm not sure at what rank, but Replicanator Gyminator strikes yet again, trying to make the Goldbeard combo work, trying to make Lab Constructor work, trying to make Ignis work. This is the weirdest deck that I have seen that apparently someone has had success with, and it is another rogue utilized in the Marin, and honestly, I really like the Marin in this deck, because imagine 0 mana Lab Constructor, 0 mana Goldbeard combo with Replicanator, 0 mana Unkillziax, 0 mana Yogg. These are all great cards to get for 0 mana. And then, like, just think about everything else. 0 mana Scoundrel, Sonya, Ignis. Like every other card you probably would have played already if you would have mulliganed for it and got lucky. There's just so many like high roll potential off the Marin into the wand combo that I believe there is something going here for this deck. I might try it in the future. I might give it a little test and see if there's something that's cooking here. But one thing that absolutely fucking scares me is Unkillziax into Lab Constructor. Concede any? Can I concede twice in a game? Is that possible? I might actually have to play this deck because that combination is absolutely fucking scaring me. But yeah, apparently, if you want to play the most base deck in Hearthstone, you better check out the Jiminator on Twitch because he does come up with the most interesting decks that I have seen in a long time. And speaking of decks making a comeback, Cutlass Rogue is also making a comeback, and I honestly don't know why this deck always high rolls me. This deck is the ultimate high roll deck, and I can prove it one easy way. There's actually 2 games that I went up against this deck on my last stream. The only 2 games I went up against Cutlass Rogue. Yes, they both had the weapon on turn 4, but one actually had an insane weapon by turn 4 because they played prep into the harmonic hip hop. And they immediately hit me in the face, immediately following up the next turn with a deadly poison. And then there was one game where someone played Cutlass on 4, and then on turn 6, just played Naked Sonya into double deadly poison just to generate a 10 attack weapon with lifesteal. And then, of course, they had other cards in order to increase the durability. Like, this is the most scam-like deck possible, where I'm just gonna scare every single Cutlass Rogue. And, yeah, you don't want to see this in your games, do you? But yeah, Cutlass Rogue apparently does make its way back into Hearthstone. It's pretty much like a Excavate Rogue, but without the Excavates. It does have lots of random cards it can generate, but one interesting card it does run is the Sweetened Snow Flurry in order to give you extra copies of temporary frost spells that do, work with the Tez, but it's also just a pinch way of increasing the durabilities of your Cutlass. Because like one card that you can get from this, for example, is Horn of Winter and Death Knight. Now that is by far the best card you can get from this. So it is frost cards, and it is important to keep in mind that these are all going to be spells from other classes. So there's a lot of different high rolls that you can get, different ways of freezing your opponent's face, different ways of maybe even like keeping yourself alive with like a random blizzard. So there's a lot of potential from this card for just keeping you alive, and that's the name of this game when it comes to Spectral Cutlass and Lifesteal. You just want to keep your life total high, so that way you can wear down your opponent over time with 10 damage every single turn if you can build up the weapon that high. But yeah, Cutlass Rogue is making a wave of a resurgence in the EU community. It's not really making that much of a resurgence in the NA community, but yeah, people are playing this deck. People are having success with it, and apparently even Pocket Train is playing it because he likes 4 different decks right now. Cutlass Rogue, Mining Rogue, Shit Rogue, and Marin Rogue. Apparently Rogue's just really good at top legend right now. Who would have thought? Next up, we have the Druid Druid deck. I have no idea what's going on here. This is the most weird tempo, I don't even know what's really going on here deck, but this is just a deck that just seems to win by putting stuff onto the field and going face and denying your mana cost. This is also another deck that is utilizing the Marin, but I really don't understand the point of the Marin in this deck. Like, it feels like this is a Marin that, dare I say, doesn't go for Wand and actually goes for Crown. You could maybe go for like a Golden Kobold with like the Goblet if you get lucky enough. If you decide to go with Wand or something like that, maybe go for like some extra damage or something. But Puppet Master Dorian works extremely well with Marin if you can somehow get that combo with Pendant of Earth to get the extra Marin. I have yet to do it, and this is something that I've been chasing after since this card was originally introduced. But yeah, I really don't understand why this deck is good. I'm more so just putting it on here because this is a development that I haven't tested myself, but I really want to figure out why this deck is becoming so popular. But it really does seem that it's just trying to play a bunch of dragons, stick the field, go face, and then just, just generate a giant board. I really don't know what else to say. Maybe one way to utilize this deck, and I'm thinking out loud because, again, I haven't tested this, you could play Marin, maybe put the Crown in your deck. Then you could play Magical Dollhouse into Bottomless Toy Chest to potentially get 2 copies of that treasure. That's kind of cool as well. Flower Child is also in here, so it's like, if I go for a Dorian combo, I'm immediately going to draw a Doomkin, a Marin, or a Phi. Those aren't really that good. Like, there's also no ENR in this deck. Like, I don't even know what's going on. I don't even know if I can recommend this, but again, this deck is everywhere on Donkey and on HSReplay, so I just feel like I have to showcase it. It feels like it's just, a typical aggro deck that is trying to end the game as quickly as possible and has, like, these late game cards that just push a lot of tempo or do one thing really well. So I'm going to recommend Druid Druid for the unpredictable factor that maybe it's a meta breaker, and on Donkey, its stats are looking surprisingly good. But if you're a normal person, if you want to play, you know, a great card that is amazing to discount to 0 mana, then let's play some Alonius Druid. This deck is also making a resurgence at Top Legend because Marin discounting the Alonius and the ENR sounds extremely satisfying. But again, you know, remember what I told you about the combo of the Golden Kobold and the Goblet? This was the deck that it was happening with, and I believe they ended up losing the game anyway. It was still a really cool turn to see happen. But yeah, this deck is still difficult. It is still the same old Owl Druid, and it still sucks to draw the ENR and the Owl. But at least this deck has a way of getting around that requirement by doing some kind of like weird like Sparkling Vial combo. And I will have a video going over this deck as well in the future, again, in case you guys want to see more highlights of this deck. Because I am still, after like 50, almost 100 games with this deck, I am still not playing this deck optimally at all. It is a very difficult deck that requires almost all of your brain power and all of your attention. So if you're watching Netflix and you're playing this deck and you're losing games, it is not on me. It is not my fault. You did get dust assassinated. I will take the blame for that. But you really got to play this deck well in order to get wins with it, because as soon as you get bad draws or as soon as you start playing unoptimally, you are just going to get stormed in the face. How do you play it optimally? You have to ramp up as quickly as you can, so that way you can potentially set up an ENR into Cover Artist combo to do a bunch of things all in one turn. You can potentially have Duelmaster Dorian as a way of, you know, like utilizing some of these ridiculous scams by getting a 1-mana Owl or a 1-mana ENR. But even getting a card like Marin for 1 mana or even like a Cover Artist for 1 mana is still extremely useful. And we haven't even talked about Fizzle yet. 1 mana Fizzle gets absolutely crazy. The potential for this deck is bonkers. It is just dummy good, everything that this deck can do. And one thing that, again, that I will utilize to the best of your ability is your Alonius Sparkling Vial combos, because there are ways to potentially play your ENR for 0 mana. You can refresh mana and make sure you have enough ways of throwing damage spells to the face and just winning the game because of that. So Owl Druid, I would highly recommend it, but only if you are a extremely skilled or a veteran Hearthstone player, because this is not an easy deck in order to spot the lines for, and you have to sometimes make your turns very quickly. And the last Druid deck we're going to go over is yet another forbidden deck. I mean, it utilizes Marin. What can I say? 0 mana cards in Druid and in Rogue are just, like, we're always going to utilize these in these two classes. It's just funny how the mini set and these new updates are always going to benefit Rogue and Druid the most. So yeah, Marin and Druid pair together perfectly. If you want to play a fun Reno deck, this is one way of doing that, because the reason why this deck is very powerful is because you can play Crystal Clunker into the Reno, deny your opponent's early game extremely quickly, and then just dominate with a bunch of, you know, cheap dragons. You can steal up mana crystals, you know, you can maybe get some random legendary minions. Again, Puppet Master Dorian combos are always going to be extremely weird, and especially in this deck where you have a lot more minions that are more likely to be drawn, it's not going to be like as insane, but you're definitely going to get a lot more value out of it. And if you can pair it with the Flower Child, it's a lot more, you know, random. There's a lot more random crap that can happen. But yeah, if you want to play, in my opinion, what is probably the most fun Highlander deck, this is the way to do it. But again, I've deleted Reno from my collection, so I'm not enjoying this deck. So we got 2 more decks to go over in this video, and they are both Mage decks. However, this Mage deck, I have no idea what's going on. In fact, I have one idea on what's going on. What I believe this deck is trying to do is that it is a control mage that is trying to stall the game as long as possible, and it has one goal in particular. Play Sleet Skater and just gain as much armor as possible, so that way you can just keep delaying the game as long as you can. Why are you delaying the game? I really don't know. Maybe there's a random card that you can find that can somehow, you know, like deal lethal damage if you can generate like a bunch of Sunset Volleys or something like that. Probably not even a good card to generate from this, but I'm just speculating. Maybe there's a really good excavation treasure out of the Hawk. There's a really good Titan that can work effectively. Maybe you just win by sticking board. Maybe Unkillziax is just so good that as soon as it comes down, your opponent just concedes. I really don't understand why someone sent me this deck, but it's another Tic-Tac special. It's another Tic-Tac deck, and I don't understand how he's winning with this, but there's wins under his belt with this deck. It can win. I would assume that the main win condition is just to play your Excavates as quickly as possible. Sometimes get your random secrets out early and then just, you know, mitigate the board, gain armor, and somehow just win that way. And there was a lot of people that were originally running Mezzadune the Fractured when this card got buffed, specifically with the Sleet Skater, because when you draw Sleet Skater with Mezzadune, you get 2 copies of the card that has Miniaturize on it, so you're effectively turning 2 Sleet Skaters into 4. So imagine getting an extra 16 armor on a Giant, for example. That's how I imagine this deck is winning, is that it's beating like Pain Warlock, it's beating like these decks that could summon a lot of stats, but if you freeze the minion over and over and over again and then summon a Yogg in order to clear the board, that is probably a way of winning the game. But how realistic, how consistent is this? How realistic of an expectation of it is it to win? I can't tell you. I really don't understand. I don't know if this deck is going to be good, and I will test it. But I imagine this is going to be an 0-2 deck that you just delete as soon as you just don't win with it. Because if you have a bad game where you just draw Yogg, Unkillziax, and Marin as your opener, this deck's not really going to do that hot. But yeah, if you want something new, I am trying my best to show you at least something that you've never seen. So if you want to play a deck that is definitely going to be shocking for your opponent, this is probably going to be my biggest recommendation because you won't even know what you're doing. Last and not least, we have Rainbow Mage. Oh boy, we have Sif Mage coming back. That's right, it's still good. It's honestly not that good. It's okay. It's not terrible. It's probably one of the better Mage archetypes right now, but it is just really funny to me how Mage is just simply not being explored as a class outside of Spell Mage. No one wants to play Mage. People don't like Sif Mage. Control Mage, the deck that I showed you earlier, is a very new development that I don't think a lot of people are really going to give a try because it does just look like a bad deck. Mage is in a really weird spot right now to where it has to rely on all these bullshit, you know, burst mechanics because it is the only thing the class does well. Cheating mana and dealing damage, but it doesn't keep itself alive. It draws somewhat consistently, but it doesn't really draw that well as like a, you know, compared to like Rogue or like Demon Hunter, for example. Mage just feels like a very clunky, chunky class right now, and I'm really hoping that the next expansion is going to guide Mage down some direction that hopefully isn't Elemental Mage. Like, I really don't like Elemental Mage. It is such I hate to use the word disgusting, but there's just a lot of unsatisfying mechanics that are in Elemental Mage, where like it is so dependent on drawing the good elemental in order to make your other elementals even remotely playable. But why does Sif Mage work? Buy one, get one freeze. This card is just so good when you pair it with Watercolor Artist. Watercolor Artist is a really interesting card because you draw a frost spell, and at the start of your turns, you've reduced its cost by 1. This is a card that doesn't need to survive in order to continue to discount the frost spells in your deck, and the only frost spells that you are running are going to be your Frostbolt as well as your buy one, get one freeze. So you have 2 copies of these Watercolor Artists. These are the cards that you immediately mulligan for because you just want to play it on turn 4, so you can start discounting this. You have the 0 mana discount, so that way you can play them on your Sif, and then you do the typical Sif combo. And this is probably the reason why Snake Oil bit the dust, because imagine having, you know, 6 mana Sif with 2 0 mana buy one get one freeze with 2, you know, Snake Oils that have already been, you know, charged a bunch because you've already played a bunch of spell schools. That just doesn't sound fun. So Snake Oil getting hit definitely need to happen with this card coming down the pipeline. But yeah, Mage really isn't exploring anything else outside of Sif Mage and Spell Mage. There's a couple of Elemental Mages, but they're really not that good. But yeah, there's a lot of things happening in Hearthstone right now. The top meta is what it is, but there are some other people that are really trying to make some of these other archetypes shine. But there you guys have it. Those are the best decks to hit Legend, the best decks to stay in Legend, as well as the best decks to have fun in Hearthstone, which is by far the most important thing. I am struggling to have fun in this expansion, so I really like that I utilized this this time to look at the more fun decks, because now I've actually revitalized myself to try some of these archetypes and see if we can't get some interesting deck guides to close out this expansion. We have a lot of new cards and a lot of new things that are going to be happening in Hearthstone, but that's not happening for another month. We still got another month to get through, and I'm going to help you guys get through it one video at a time. So thank you guys so much for making it to the end of this video. If you made it to the very end, make a comment, say, hey Clark HELLSCREAM,
you're the Goblin King. I don't know why I said Goblin King, but that we're just gonna roll with it. If you made it to this video and you put that comment, you're my favorite fan. So thank you so much for making it to the end of this video. I can't speak anymore, and I'll see you on stream in the next hour, probably on stream right now. But we'll see you for the next video.